extreme was exemplified by Satanism and 666 and burning crosses in your arms. And when they latched onto that, they really tried to, take it to the extreme. They like to go around telling people, they'd say, Satan's my man.
Truth was, their belief in Satan was no more real than those acts on TV. Ricky certainly spoke often of Satan, but no one ever saw him involved in satanic rituals or animal sacrifices. Satan became Ricky's scapegoat, and the news media ate it up.
The press release alluded to the satanic cult. The satanic cult never existed. There was some misinformation went out, inaccurate information. But you can't stop the press.
A cult of teenage suburban Satan worshippers became a convenient way to frame an otherwise unmotivated and gruesome crime, even if it wasn't necessarily true. For as much as the kids said they loved Satan, the press loved Satan even more.
The press release that went out caused a frenzy which I've never seen or have seen since. We were completely unprepared for it.
In truth, there was no satanic cult in Northport. Evil dwelled here, but in the form of drugs and lack of adult supervision, and a youth culture bombarded with satanic images from the media. Satan was merely a symptom, not the cause of what went so terribly wrong here. As a youngster, Ricky showed no indication that he'd be a troubled teen, but by the age of 11, he began smoking marijuana. His total transformation would take a few more years.
When I first met Ricky, he was, I guess, was around 7th or 8th grade, and to me, he was a pretty quiet guy. Short hair, pretty clean cut, just not an imposing person, just a quiet, decent-looking guy.
As he approached adolescence, Ricky struggled to find out who he was, what he was good at, and how he could stand out from the crowd. He was 13 and on the football team when he met his best friend, Jimmy Troiano. Though Ricky's interest in football waned, his friendship with Jimmy grew. Because he was not scholastically, athletically, nor socially talented, Ricky dropped out of school by the time he turned 16. That left a vacuum in his life. Drugs rushed to fill it.
I think Ricky was doing drugs as an escape. Anytime that I would see him where he was tripping or he was high, it almost seemed as if he was in his element at that point. Ricky was, drugged out Ricky.
Just as his academic life found him wanting, Ricky's home life put pressure on him. His father was strict, and Ricky rebelled against any form of authority. Soon he was not only using drugs, but selling them as well.
To me, Ricky spiraled out of control. It had to be during 9th grade. He went from a pretty clean-cut guy. Next thing you know, within a year and a half period, he was the long hair, the concert T-shirts, just a whole total new look to himself, and it was quite obvious that he was well into drugs at that point.
Ricky also began to get into trouble with the law. Once he was caught stealing skulls from an old Indian cemetery. Some thought it was part of a satanic ritual. But in the end, it was just Ricky being Ricky. He would sell them for drug money. Of course, Ricky wouldn't have succeeded if he hadn't found a ready market to peddle his wares.
During school day during the week, around 12, 1 o'clock, kids would start either cutting out of school or they didn't even go to school, they'd end up here. People would come down here, trip out, or smoke pot and just hang out and basically have fun. Normal people would walk by that are not high, and they gotta say, these kids are on something, because they act like real lunatics sometimes.
One of their favorite spots was the gazebo in the park down by the waterfront.
A lot of the residents sort of objected to the teenage kids hanging out on Main Street. You know, we were under pressure to get rid of them. So we would force them down into the parks.
They figured we were little, the teenager kids and just hanging around town. And I guess in their minds, they'd rather us in plain view out here than in a neighborhood burglarizing houses or something,
While parents went off to their white-collar jobs, their children participated in a parallel and equally thriving economy. The only laws they respected were the laws of supply and demand, and Ricky was the town's chief supplier.
I can remember a certain instance we were hanging out at a shopping center, Food Town in Northport, and it was kind of late at night, and Ricky was standing in front of a pizzeria, and I just approached him and said, "Hey, Ricky, what's going on? What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, geez, I'm so stoned, doing acid." He says, "I was taking a leak and a toilet bowl melted." I said, "Really?" He says, "What'd you do?" He says, "I just stuck it in my pants." I said, "Okay, way to go."
Ricky's parents tried everything to save their son. They enrolled him in a community drug program. They even committed him to a psychiatric hospital. But nothing seemed to work. By the spring of 1984, Ricky Kasso's life began to revolve increasingly around drugs. It was around that time that Gary Lauwers allegedly stole some from him at a party, setting in motion a chain of events that would see both of them dead within a month. The night Gary Lauwers was murdered began in typical fashion.
On the night of the murder, it was around 7, 8 o'clock at night, and me and Ricky and Alba were hanging out, and Gary was like on another park bench further down. We were already dosing. We all took some acid, and we was tripping already. I felt a little tense between Ricky and Gary, but Ricky was being pretty cool about it and took Gary in, and that's why Gary, I guess, came with us. He wasn't forced or coerced into the woods, but we were high, so that was one way we got him into the woods.
The case against Ricky Kasso would have been clear-cut. Shortly after his arrest, he admitted to police that he murdered Gary Lauwers.
When we was in the jail cell, that's when he told me that he made a statement, signed a statement on himself, and everything, that he did it, that I had nothing to do with it. And I was surprised, that he did all that.
Jimmy had good reason to be surprised, because Ricky was lying, either to the police or to Jimmy. In Ricky's statement, he had related Jimmy's involvement in the slaying.
I was holding him on the ground, and Jimmy kicked him in the ribs. I looked up at Jimmy, and Jimmy indicated to me to cut his throat. I then took out my knife and stabbed Gary. The knife went all the way in. Somehow he got away and ran through the woods. I caught him and brought him back to where the fire was. I dropped my knife when I chased him, and Jimmy Troiano found it. Troiano gave me the knife, and I stabbed Gary in the back and the front a whole bunch of times. Me and Troiano dragged Gary back into the woods. We started to cover him up with leaves, and he sat up. I bugged out, started to stab him in the face. I didn't count how many times. I'm not really sure. I don't know what I said, but I said a whole bunch of satanic things.
Also, according to the statement, Jimmy prolonged the violence by finding Ricky's knife and handing it back to him. From Ricky's account, Jimmy looked equally guilty. But the statement couldn't be used in court. Shortly after giving it, Ricky Kasso hanged himself, rendering the document useless and inadmissible.